I never imagined myself the kind of person who'd end up house-sitting in a big suburban home, especially one that felt too quiet even during the day. But that November, I needed the break. My apartment's heating had failed again, my hours at work had been cut, and my aunt, who traveled more than she stayed home, offered me a warm bed, stocked pantry, and a little extra cash if I stayed at her place for the weekend. She lived in a neighborhood called Willow Ridge. Wide streets, manicured lawns, security cameras on every front porch. The kind of place where people waved at each other from driveways and bragged about property taxes. My aunt, Annette, gave me the tour when I arrived. She was already packed for her flight. "You'll be fine here," she said, tossing me a spare key. "Nobody ever bothers anyone in this neighborhood. If the doorbell rings after 9, it's probably a package." "Who gets packages that late?" I asked. She shrugged. "Retirees with too much money." By the time she left, the sun had dipped beneath the rows of identical roofs. A storm was brewing, one of those Midwest thunderstorms that rattles picture frames. I made tea, curled up on her leather couch, and tried to pretend I belonged in a house with marble countertops and a foyer big enough to echo. Around 10, rain hammered the windows. The power flickered once, humming like it was thinking about quitting. I double-checked the locks, partly out of habit, partly because big houses have a way of reminding you how small you are inside them. The neighborhood went quiet. No cars, no dogs, not even wind between fences. Just me, the storm, and a house that somehow felt too awake. I didn't know it yet, but something else was awake too, and it knew I was inside. It was a little past midnight when the doorbell rang, not a polite tap or a hesitant knock, the full mechanical chime that echoed through the entire house. I froze on the staircase. No one should have been out in that weather. No one should have even known the house was occupied. I waited, listening. The storm growled against the windows, but nothing else followed. Against my better judgment, I crept toward the front door. My socks slid on the polished hardwood as I approached, keeping the hallway lights off so whoever stood outside couldn't see me clearly. Through the peephole, I saw him. A man, maybe mid-40s, drenched head to toe. Rainwater dripped from his jacket, his hair plastered to his forehead. He shifted anxiously, glancing over his shoulder like someone might be watching him. "Hello?" he called, voice muffled through the door. "I'm sorry to bother you. I left a suitcase inside earlier today. Your aunt said I could come by and get it." Every alarm in my body went off. My aunt was in Arizona. She hadn't had visitors in weeks. "I think you have the wrong house," I said firmly, but loud enough to be heard. "I'm not allowed to open the door." He stepped closer, his face too close to the peephole. No. She told me I could stop by if I needed it. It's right inside, I just need help carrying it out." My stomach tightened. His eyes weren't frantic, they were calculating. "I can call her," I said. The shift was instant. His shoulders stiffened, his jaw tightened. No, don't do that. Just step outside for a second." The hallway felt colder. My heart pounded so hard I was sure he could hear it through the door. Something wasn't right. Something was dangerously wrong. I backed away from the door slowly, the same way someone might back away from a wild animal. I didn't answer, didn't explain, just moved deeper into the dark hallway. I switched off the last light, leaving myself in shadows. For a moment, the house was silent except for the storm. Then the doorknob rattled. Not a gentle test, a violent, jarring shake. Hey! He shouted from outside. "Just open up." The knob twisted again, harder this time. The door thudded in its frame. My breath caught. My aunt's house suddenly felt too big, with too many windows and too many ways for him to get in. My mind scrambled. Where could I go? Should I hide? Call someone? Would the police even come fast enough in this storm? "If you don't leave," I shouted, fighting to steady my voice, "I'm calling the police right now." The rattling stopped. For 2 seconds there was nothing. Just rain, thunder, and my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then footsteps, Fast, splashing footsteps pounded down the driveway. I rushed to the window in the living room, peeking through a slit in the blinds. The man sprinted down the street, disappearing between rows of darkened houses. I locked every window, every door, rechecked them twice. After that, I sat on the couch with every light on, gripping my phone like a lifeline. I wanted to call my aunt, but it was nearly 1 a.m., and part of me still had a shaky hope that maybe, just maybe, this was some bizarre misunderstanding. But the truth sat heavy on my shoulders. He wasn't confused. He wasn't lost. He knew someone was inside, and that was the part that scared me most. The storm had cleared by dawn, leaving the neighborhood looking too peaceful, like a painting pretending nothing had happened. I barely slept. Every creak of the house jolted me awake, convinced he'd returned. When my aunt called from the airport 3 hours later, her voice was cheerful, oblivious. "How's the house? You settling in all right?" I exhaled shakily. Did you tell anyone I was staying here?" "No," she said instantly. "Why?" I told her everything. From the doorbell, the suitcase story, the rattling doorknob, to the way he ran into the storm when I threatened police. She grew quiet. "I don't know any man like that," she said. "And no one has a key but you and me." "What did he look like?" I described him. Every detail I could remember. She didn't recognize a single thing. "That's not a neighbor," she said firmly. "Nobody here would show up at midnight. People in this neighborhood call ahead before they even walk across the street." "Well," I whispered, "he knew the house was occupied." "How? My car wasn't in the driveway." "That's what scares me." I walked the property after our call. Nothing looked disturbed. No footprints, washed away by the storm. No sign of forced entry. But something still felt wrong, as if the house held the memory of the previous night. That evening, I turned on the porch camera my aunt had forgotten to mention. When I checked the recording, my blood chilled. The man had stood on the porch for nearly 5 minutes before ringing the bell, listening, waiting, almost testing the house. He'd leaned close to the door, like he was trying to hear breathing inside. And then, at one point, he looked straight at the camera and smiled. After I sent the footage to my aunt, she forwarded it to the neighborhood watch group and the local police. I wasn't expecting much, but a detective actually called me that afternoon. His voice was calm, too calm, like this wasn't the first story of its kind he'd heard. "We've had similar reports," he said. "Suburban neighborhoods are targets. People assume wealth means empty houses during travel seasons. The man you saw, he didn't want a suitcase." I swallowed. What did he want? He paused. "Entry. Once someone opens the door halfway, it's easy to force the rest." I felt the room tilt. "So he was trying to break in?" "Yes. And the story he gave you? That's a common tactic, claiming they've been inside before, claiming they know the homeowner, claiming you just need to step outside for a moment." My skin crawled. But how did he know someone was inside? "Some people watch homes for days," the detective said. "Lights, shadows, movement. Sometimes they knock just to test who answers." "And if I hadn't said I was calling the police?" The detective exhaled slowly. "Then you likely wouldn't be talking to me right now." That night, I didn't stay at my aunt's house. I packed my things, triple-checked the locks, and drove back to my drafty apartment, choosing broken heating over perfect silence. Days passed before my heartbeat stopped jumping at random sounds. Weeks before I could stand in front of a door without imagining a shadow on the other side. Even now, whenever I house-sit or stay alone somewhere unfamiliar, I move quietly, listening first, trusting the instinct that saved me. Because danger doesn't always break down doors. Sometimes it rings the bell and waits to see who answers. Always trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it usually is. Safety isn't about paranoia. It's about recognizing that danger often hides behind polite voices, convincing stories, and familiar settings. Caution may feel uncomfortable, but ignoring it can cost far more than peace of mind. My cousin Caleb owned a home that sat on 10 acres of quiet farmland, a place so rural it felt like darkness had its own personality. Out there, night didn't just fall, it settled. Heavy, thick, like a blanket that smothered every sound after sunset. When he asked me to house sit while he visited his girlfriend in Colorado, I agreed mostly because I needed a break from my own noisy life. I was behind on rent, behind on sleep, and behind on everything that required having my head screwed on straight. Caleb's place was the opposite of the city. One long gravel drive, one barn, one old farmhouse that creaked like it inhaled and exhaled with the wind. No neighbors within shouting distance. The kind of place people romanticize until they spend a night there alone. The first 2 days were uneventful. I fed his cattle, watered the horses, walked his aging golden retriever Daisy, and spent my evenings reading in the living room while the crickets chirped outside. Peaceful in a way city people pay therapists to imagine. But the third night changed everything. The silence felt wrong. Rural quiet is usually layered. Bugs, distant coyotes, wind brushing through corn. But around 2 a.m., the house felt sealed off, like something was muffling the world outside. That's when I heard it. Creak, slow, steady, repetitive. The unmistakable sound of the porch swing moving. At first I assumed it was the wind, but the trees outside were unnervingly still. The leaves weren't even trembling. My stomach tightened as I sat up on the couch, holding my breath, listening. Creak, creak. Someone, or something, was sitting on that swing, and the house felt a lot less empty than it had an hour before. I moved quietly toward the staircase that led to the upstairs landing. Daisy, who normally snored through thunderstorms, lifted her head and let out a low, uneasy groan. That was my first real sign something wasn't right. From the landing, I had a clear view of the front porch through the arched window above the door. I leaned just enough to look. There were 2 figures sitting on the porch swing. They weren't talking loudly, but whispering, soft enough that it sounded like hissing between teeth. They faced the front door directly, like they were waiting for someone to open it. My breath caught in my throat. They were sitting so still that I wondered how long they had been there. Long enough that the motion lights should have triggered, except they never had. A cold realization hit me. They hadn't walked up recently. They'd been sitting there long before I heard them. I whispered to myself, "What the hell?" One figure, the one on the right, leaned forward just slightly, enough that I saw the faint outline of a hooded sweatshirt. The second figure sat straighter, hands folded in their lap. I flicked on the porch light. Both figures stopped moving immediately. Then, at the exact same moment, they stood, not startled, calmly, almost choreographed. They stepped off the porch and walked to the edge of the front yard, stopping at the tree line. Their faces were lost in the dark, but their heads were tilted upward, staring straight at the house. They didn't shout. They didn't run. They just watched. I felt the kind of fear that makes your legs weak. Rural quiet suddenly felt like a trap. No neighbors to call, no chance anyone passing by might help. Just me, the dark, and 2 strangers who had no reason to be there. I grabbed my phone with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. My first instinct was to call Caleb, but I knew he was hours away, probably asleep in some Airbnb cabin. Instead, I took Daisy upstairs with me, locking the front door and double-checking every window on the way. A few minutes passed, maybe 10. My heart never slowed. Then came the sound. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Gravel. The sound didn't come from the driveway. It came from the back of the property, near the barn. Someone was walking across the loose stones behind the house. I grabbed the baseball bat Caleb kept by the door. Daisy let out a deep growl, staring toward the mudroom. The rattle of the mudroom door handle snapped the air like a whip. Someone was trying to get in. I shouted, "I'm calling the police!" The rattling stopped instantly. Silence swallowed the house. Even Daisy froze, listening. After maybe 30 seconds, I heard fast footsteps on dirt, someone running around the side of the house. Then nothing. No more crunching gravel. No more footsteps. Just silence. But something else caught my eye. On the hardwood floor near the basement door, Daisy was staring at a line of faint, dusty footprints leading downward. Prints I knew hadn't been there earlier. My breath went shallow. Whoever was outside might not have been the only one. I backed away, closed the basement door, and shoved a chair under the handle. My body operated on panic autopilot. I didn't just have intruders outside. Someone had already been inside. I barricaded myself in the upstairs bedroom with Daisy pacing nervously beside me. My fingers shook so badly that dialing 911 took 2 attempts. The operator tried to keep me calm, but her voice only highlighted how trapped I really was. "Officers are on their way," she said. "Do you have a safe room you can stay in?" "I'm in the upstairs bedroom," I whispered. "I think someone was inside earlier." "Do not go downstairs. Do not investigate anything. Stay where you are." Her instructions were obvious, but hearing them aloud made my situation feel real in a way that punched me in the chest. Minutes crawled by. Every sound felt like a threat. The settling house, Daisy's breathing, even the wind finally picking up outside. At one point, footsteps echoed faintly on the porch again. I held my breath, staring at the doorknob like it might turn any second. Red and blue lights finally flashed through the window. Relief flooded my entire body so fast I almost cried. Officers searched the porch first, then the barn, then the entire perimeter. Eventually, an officer knocked gently on the bedroom door. "You're safe to come out," he said. His voice was calm, but his expression told me he didn't like what they found. Outside, beneath the porch, officers pulled out a rumpled blanket, an old backpack, a plastic water jug, and the remains of a half-eaten sandwich. A makeshift camp, hidden in a space barely tall enough to crawl under. "They've been here a while," one officer murmured. "Days, maybe longer." My skin prickled. 2 people living under the house, walking the property at night, sitting on the swing, watching the front door, and I had been sleeping just a few feet above them. The police swept the property twice more before leaving, but they didn't find the 2 figures. They didn't find footprints leading away. They didn't find signs of forced entry. It was as if the pair had dissolved into the darkness once the flashing lights appeared. Caleb drove back the next day. He was pale when I told him everything, pacing the living room as he processed it. "You think they were squatting here?" he asked. "Maybe," I said. "But they weren't hiding from me that night. They wanted me to see them." He rubbed his jaw. "They must have been watching the house before you got here." "Probably," I replied. "Long enough to know when someone was inside." The basement footprints bothered me the most. They weren't bare. Not muddy. Just dusty. Like someone who'd been living under the porch had explored the house when no one was around. A chill ran through me every time I imagined a stranger walking through the halls, opening doors, watching the quiet life above them. Caleb installed more cameras, new locks, brighter motion lights. But even with new security, the house felt forever changed. Not just a home on open land, but a place where the dark had once held people I never saw coming. A few nights later, I returned to my apartment. City noise never sounded so comforting. Passing cars, arguing neighbors, sirens in the distance, all reminders that I wasn't alone. Because out there, in the quiet places, being alone isn't peaceful. Sometimes it's the exact reason someone chooses your house. Never ignore what feels wrong. Rural silence, isolated comfort, and familiar neighborhoods can hide people who watch, wait, and move in the spaces you assume are empty. Trust your instincts, secure your surroundings, And always take the unexpected seriously. Your safety depends on it. I never planned on house sitting in the middle of nowhere, but when my coworker Haley asked if I could watch her place for a long weekend, she made it sound harmless. Just a small farmhouse, 2 cats, and some plants that needed watering. I'd been craving quiet anyway, so I said yes before thinking it through. I didn't realize quiet meant complete isolation. Her closest neighbor lived a mile down the road, and the closest store was nearly 20 minutes away. The house itself was old but charming. Wide porch, tin roof, long driveway that cut through open pasture. In daylight, the place felt peaceful. Once the sun went down, though, the darkness wrapped around the property like a heavy blanket. Out there, night didn't have streetlights or passing headlights, just blackness. A storm rolled in on my first night. Not a gentle rain, but a violent, unforgiving downpour that shook the windows and made the house groan. Lightning split the sky again and again, until finally the power snapped off with a loud click. The whole house vanished into black. Only my car's headlights remained, tiny islands of light cutting through the darkness outside. I left them on intentionally, thinking they might make me feel safer. Instead, they looked like 2 glowing eyes staring nervously into the storm. I tried to sleep in the living room, flashlight in hand, the cats curled up beside me, but the storm kept yanking me awake. I told myself it was just the weather making the house feel unfamiliar. By 3 in the morning, I'd given up on resting and sat listening to the wind howl outside. I wasn't scared yet, just uncomfortable, unsettled in the way only rural dark can make you feel. That changed the moment I heard the crunch of gravel in the driveway. One slow step at a time. Someone was out there. At first, I thought the storm was playing tricks on my ears, but the sound kept coming. Steady, deliberate crunching that didn't match the rhythm of the rain. The driveway wasn't close. It ran a good 40 yards from the road to the house, so anyone walking it would take time to reach the top. I froze near the living room window, afraid to move, gripping my dim flashlight like a weapon that wouldn't help me at all. The cats perked up, staring toward the same direction. Animals know things. We always say that as a joke, but that night, I believed it. Lightning flashed, illuminating the long gravel path. A man was walking up the driveway. Drenched, head down, shoulders slumped forward as if carrying invisible weight. He didn't run from the rain or shield his eyes from the wind. He just walked, slow and steady, straight toward the house. I dropped below the window instantly, heart beating so hard it felt like it was shaking the floor. "What the hell?" I whispered to myself, afraid to breathe too loudly. I waited for him to knock on the door, but he didn't. Instead, he walked past the porch, straight toward my parked car. He stopped behind it, placed both hands on the trunk, and started pushing. He pushed like his life depended on it. His face twisted, not angry, not confused, but blank, like he wasn't fully awake. He leaned his entire weight forward, boots digging into the gravel, body straining against metal. The car didn't move an inch. I stayed crouched, watching through the window frame. He never looked toward the house, not once. He never scanned the yard, never checked for lights or signs of life. He just kept pushing. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he let go. He stood still for a moment, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. Finally, he turned around and began walking back down the driveway, same pace, same posture, until the storm swallowed him whole. Only after he disappeared did I realize I'd been holding my breath. It took almost an hour for my nerves to settle enough to stand. I checked the locks twice, then 3 times. The cats hid under the couch, refusing to come out. Every few minutes, lightning flashed just enough for me to scan the driveway, terrified the man might return. But he didn't. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I kept the flashlight on, gripping it so tightly my hand cramped, ready to swing it at anything that got too close. I tried to tell myself the stranger was just lost, confused by the storm. The problem was, nothing about his behavior felt confused. It felt purposeful, focused, driven by something I couldn't understand. When daylight finally crept across the fields, I stepped onto the porch with shaky legs. The storm had passed, leaving the yard quiet and washed clean. I looked toward the driveway, expecting to see footprints or drag marks or something showing the man had been there. But the gravel looked untouched. I walked to the car next, heart still pounding. My car was covered in water droplets and dust. But the trunk? Smooth. No handprints, no streaks, not even a smudge of dirt. Nothing indicated someone had touched it. I checked the ground around it. No boot prints, no scuff marks, no signs of anyone pushing a vehicle in the middle of a storm. I stood there longer than I needed to, trying to make sense of it all. I knew what I'd seen. I knew what I'd heard. But daylight had erased every trace. It was like the storm swallowed the evidence along with the man, or like he'd never been there at all. When Haley called to check on the animals later that morning, I kept my voice steady for as long as possible, about 10 seconds. "Haley, someone came up your driveway last night." She paused. "Like in a car?" "No, walking. During the storm, he pushed my car. Hard." "Pushed it?" she repeated, confused. "Why would he do that?" "I have no idea. And when he was done, he just walked back toward the road. He didn't say anything. He didn't look around. He just came and went like it was planned." She sighed, and for a second I thought she was going to laugh. "Look," she said gently, "storms disorient people out here. We get hikers, hunters, travelers. Sometimes they get lost, especially at night. But no one ever comes up my driveway. You're the first person to even mention something like that." "I checked this morning," I said. "No footprints, no handprints, nothing." "Yeah, the ground floods quickly," she said. "Storms erase a lot. Don't overthink it." But her voice lacked conviction, and when she added, "I mean, usually people follow the main road, not private property," I heard the doubt creeping in. She wasn't trying to reassure me anymore. She was trying to reassure herself. That night, I sat in the living room again, porch light on, watching the driveway like it owed me answers. But the truth was simple. Whoever that man was, why he pushed my car, where he went afterward, none of it made sense. And I couldn't shake the feeling he hadn't been lost at all. He came up the driveway for a reason. He pushed the car for a reason. And the reason had nothing to do with needing help. I stayed the remainder of the weekend because pride wouldn't let me bail early. But every night, I slept with the flashlight on, and the cats curled tightly against me. Every creak of the house made me jump. Every small rustle outside forced me to the window. Nothing happened. No footsteps. No visitors. No more blank-faced strangers walking through the storm. But the quiet didn't comfort me anymore. It felt loaded, like silence was hiding something I couldn't see. When Haley finally returned, she listened to the full story again, this time without interrupting. She paced her kitchen, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the floor. "I've lived here 8 years," she finally said. "I've never had someone walk up that driveway, not once." "Then why now?" I asked. She looked at me like she didn't want to say her real thoughts out loud. "Some people out here wander," she finally murmured. "Storms make them act strange. Or maybe he just sleepwalked up a private driveway and tried to move a stranger's car," I said. She didn't answer. I drove home that afternoon, glancing at my rearview mirror more than the road. I kept expecting to see someone walking behind me, head down, hands reaching for the trunk. I still don't understand what happened that night. I don't know who he was or where he came from, but I know what I saw. And I know he wasn't stumbling around lost. He came up that driveway with purpose, and whatever pushed him there wasn't the storm. I've always thought of Maple Hollow as one of those neighborhoods where the world seemed to take a breath. Quiet streets, trimmed lawns, and houses spaced just far enough apart that you felt like you had your own little corner of peace. My aunt and her husband lived at the very end of the cul-de-sac, tucked between two empty lots that builders abandoned years ago when funding dried up. A line of old oak trees stood behind the property like a natural fence, tall enough to swallow the last bit of sunset every evening. When my aunt asked me to house sit for the weekend, it felt like the easiest favor in the world. Watch the place, water the plants, keep an eye on my little cousin Milo, who was staying with them for the month. Nothing complicated. I was 22, between semesters at community college, and grateful for the quiet. The first night went smoothly. Pizza, an animated movie, Milo falling asleep halfway through with his head on my arm. I carried him upstairs, tucked him in, and slept on the downstairs couch just in case he woke up scared in an unfamiliar place. By the second evening, I'd settled into the house's rhythm. The hum of the fridge, the creak of the back steps, the gentle sway of the oak branches brushing the roof. I remember thinking the house felt too calm, like a pause before something shifted. I didn't know yet that a stranger had chosen that same night to cross the empty lots, slip behind the oak trees, and let himself into the garden shed. But I would find out soon enough. And once I did, I would never think of Maple Hollow the same way again. It was a little after 10 when I saw it, the garden shed light flickering like a dying bulb before glowing steady. The shed sat about 30 feet from the back porch, far enough away that you'd need a flashlight at night unless you turned that one specific switch inside. My aunt mentioned once that the motion sensor used to work, but it burned out years ago. So when that light turned on by itself, a cold feeling crept up my spine. At first I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a raccoon bumped the door. Maybe Milo had wandered outside earlier and I hadn't noticed. Or maybe I was just tired, imagining things because the house was too quiet. Still, I walked to the back window, and that's when I froze. A man stood inside the shed, not moving, not pacing, just standing there in the middle of the floor like he was posing for a photograph. His head was slightly tilted, eyes fixed directly toward the house, as if he'd been waiting for me to look out. When he stepped forward, pushing the shed door open with this slow, deliberate motion, something inside me snapped into survival mode. I whispered, "Milo," and darted to the living room. He was curled on the couch, half asleep and confused as I scooped him into my arms. "What's happening?" he mumbled. "Shh, just stay quiet." I carried him upstairs, heart hammering so hard my vision pulsed with every beat. We reached the guest bedroom, and I knelt eye level with him. "I need you to hide in the closet," I whispered. "Stay there until I say it's okay." The second I shut the closet door, footsteps crunching on gravel echoed outside. The man wasn't in the shed anymore. He was coming toward the house. I dialed 911 with shaking hands, whispering into the phone while trying not to breathe too loudly. As I pressed the dresser against the bedroom door, I heard footsteps circling the house, slow, methodical, like he was mapping every window. Then came the tapping, soft, rhythmic, as if he was checking which pane might crack first. 911, what's your emergency?" "There's someone on the property," I whispered. "He was in the shed. I don't know how he got in. I have a child with me. Please hurry." "Stay on the line," the operator said. "Lock yourself in a room. Officers are on the way." I had the phone pressed so tightly to my ear I could hear my own pulse. Then the tapping stopped. Silence washed over the house. A heavy, unnatural stillness that made every nerve stand on edge. That's when the back door handle began turning. Slowly. Over and over. Metal scraping against metal. "He's trying to get inside," I whispered. "Do not engage. Do not go downstairs. Police are 4 minutes out." 4 minutes felt like 4 lifetimes. The handle stopped. For a moment, I thought he'd left. I almost convinced myself I imagined the entire thing, that maybe stress and shadows had filled in the blanks my brain didn't understand. Then gravel crunched directly below the guest room window. I stepped backward until my spine hit the wall. A faint scraping sound brushed the siding, like fingers dragging along the exterior. Then 2 muddy footprints appeared beneath the window, illuminated by the faint glow of the shed light still spilling across the yard. He was right below us, almost close enough to touch the glass. I clutched the phone, whispering, "Please get here, please." And finally, sirens sounded in the distance. Red and blue lights flashed across the house as 3 officers spread across the yard with their flashlights drawn. I rushed to the closet and pulled the door open. Milo's eyes were wide and glossy, but he didn't cry. He just clung to me with both arms around my neck. "It's okay," I whispered. "They're here now." Downstairs, one officer asked me to describe everything from the beginning. His partner checked each room, while another 2 searched the yard and the shed. After what felt like an hour, the officer returned, shaking his head. "No one's out there," he said. "But we did find this." He stepped aside so I could see the muddy footprints beneath the window. Clear, deep impressions of boots. Whoever he was real. And he had been close. Too close. Another officer approached from the shed. "You said the light came on by itself?" "Yes," I said. "I thought it was motion activated." "It's not," he replied quietly. "There's no motion sensor. Light switch is inside the shed. Someone had to flip it manually." A cold chill ran across my skin. They asked questions. Had I seen anyone around earlier? Did my aunt know anyone who might stop by? Had there been issues with trespassers? I answered everything, but each question left me feeling more unsettled. Because I knew what I saw. A man standing completely still. A smile that didn't belong to someone sane. The way he approached the house with patience, not panic. He wasn't looking to steal. He was looking to enter. And he didn't care who was inside. When the officers finished their sweep, they suggested I stay somewhere else for the night. "I can take you to my aunt's friend's place," one of them offered. "Just until morning." I didn't argue. I packed fast, grabbed Milo, and left the house with the lights still on behind us. The shed light was the last thing I saw before we drove away. My aunt and her husband returned the next morning. They were expecting to hear stories about pizza nights and cartoons, not a stranger pacing the property in the dark. My aunt kept touching her chest like she was trying to steady her heart. My uncle walked around the yard twice before coming back in, saying only, "We'll put up cameras." Today. Police followed up 2 days later. No leads, no suspects, no reports of anyone matching the description. It was almost worse than if they'd found someone, because not knowing meant he could come back. That night, I lay awake replaying the image of him in the shed, the stillness, the deliberate smile, the quiet confidence of someone who didn't rush because he felt like he had all the time in the world. I kept thinking about the tapping on the windows, the hand twisting the doorknob, the footprints under the guest window, and I wondered, what would have happened if I'd waited 10 more seconds before grabbing Milo? What if I hadn't looked out the window at all? What if the police had taken 5 minutes instead of 4? For weeks, shadows felt heavier. Silence felt sharper. Maple Hollow didn't feel like a neighborhood that took a breath anymore. It felt like one holding it. But slowly, life settled back to normal. The cameras went up. Extra locks were installed. My aunt never asked me to house sit again, not because she didn't trust me, but because she couldn't stand the memory of what almost happened. Even now, when I pass a garden shed or see a porch light flicker, something inside me tenses. But I remind myself I reacted fast, protected Milo, and stayed calm when it mattered. It doesn't take courage to avoid danger. It takes courage to keep living after you've seen it up close. I've always liked quiet places, but there's a difference between quiet and isolated. The cabin belonged to my family friends, the Harpers, who owned a hand-built log home deep in the Washington woods. So deep that cell service came and went depending on which step of the porch you stood on. They loved the solitude. I tolerated it. When they asked me to house sit for 3 nights while they took their kids on a long planned vacation, I said yes, mostly because I needed the break from my own apartment. They reminded me, half joking, everyone knows we'll be gone, so feel free to enjoy the peace. I didn't think much of it then. The cabin itself had 2 floors and a long wraparound deck the Harpers were proud of. Below it was a spacious basement with storage, a laundry room, and a single narrow window that faced the trees. I'd stayed there before, but never alone, and never during storm season. The first 2 days passed quietly. I worked remotely from the living room, took their dog, Boone, on long walks, and listened to the rain hitting the metal roof at night. On the 3rd evening, though, the storm that had been rumbling in the distance finally moved overhead. Lightning flashed behind the pines, thunder rolled like shifting boulders, and Boone stuck close to my leg, trembling. I didn't know then that the storm wasn't the only thing that had arrived. Around 8 p.m., Boone whined at the back door, insisting on going outside despite the downpour. I grabbed a flashlight, trudged through the mud with him, and came back soaked to the skin. As I shook out my jacket in the entryway, something caught my eye, a faint draft brushing my ankle. The basement door was cracked. I hadn't opened it. I headed downstairs with the flashlight beam wobbling across the steps. The basement was dim and smelled of wet concrete, but everything looked the same as earlier, except for one thing. The small window facing the woods was slightly open, pushed inward by maybe 2 inches. I stared at it, trying to imagine the wind having enough force to lift the latch. It didn't make sense. The storm was blowing from the opposite direction. Still, I convinced myself nature could be unpredictable. I locked the window, double-checked it, then headed back upstairs. That's when I heard the footsteps. Not the soft skittering sound of Boone's paws, but slow, deliberate steps, moving from one end of the upstairs hallway to the other. My breath caught in my throat. "Boone?" I called quietly. He appeared beside my leg immediately, meaning whoever was walking upstairs wasn't him. I froze on the basement stairs, heart thudding violently. Someone was in the house, and whoever it was, they were comfortable enough to walk right where they knew I could hear them. When I reached the main level, the house felt wrong, lit in places I hadn't lit, rearranged in ways too subtle to notice at first glance. The guest room lamp glowed through the crack of the half-open door. The closet in the master bedroom stood ajar, though I never touched it. Every instinct told me not to open anything, not to call out again. Boone pressed close to me, ears pinned back, tail tucked tight. Dogs know things we don't. I moved into the hallway slowly, trying to listen past the storm beating the roof. At first I heard nothing. Then, soft movement, a brush of fabric, a shift of weight. And then, through the gap beneath the guest door, a shadow passed. A human shadow. My entire body went cold, like every drop of blood froze in place. I stepped back quietly, clutching Boone's collar with one hand, while I texted the Harpers with the other. "Me. Is anyone supposed to be here? I think someone's in the house." Harper. "No. Grab Boone and leave right now. Don't go upstairs again." I didn't hesitate. I didn't even breathe. I turned toward the front door, moving fast without breaking into a run. Boone stayed glued to my leg, trembling. But the moment my hand touched the doorknob, a sudden pounding erupted from behind me. Heavy, frantic footsteps barreling down the staircase. Someone was running, and it wasn't toward me. It was away. The intruder sprinted past the kitchen and crashed through the back exit so violently that the screen door bounced off the wall and slammed again. Boone barked wildly as I yanked the front door open, dragged him outside, and vaulted off the porch steps. I didn't stop until I reached the gravel driveway, about 40 yards from the house. Only then did I dare look back. The back door hung open, swinging in the storm wind. Rain whipped sideways across the deck. But whoever had fled was already swallowed by the forest. No movement, no silhouette, just the trembling trees. I called 911 with hands shaking so badly I dropped the phone once. Deputies arrived 20 minutes later, long enough for fear to settle into something colder. Anger, maybe, or disbelief. They searched the basement, the bedrooms, every corner of the property. Nothing. No broken windows, no forced doors, no signs of struggle aside from muddy boot prints near the back deck. One deputy said, "He probably thought the place was empty. You scared him off." I didn't feel proud of that. I felt sick. When the homeowners finally got back in touch, their voices were tight, apologetic, and tinged with something like guilt. "We told a lot of people we'd be gone," Mr. Harper admitted. "Maybe too many. Small community, lots of acquaintances. Someone might have wanted to take advantage of an empty house." The idea that the intruder might have been someone they knew made my skin crawl. When the deputies left, the house felt colder than before, emptier somehow, despite the lights blazing in every room. I grabbed my things, packed fast, and drove away down the single-lane road with Boone curled beside me in the passenger seat, still trembling. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the motel walls made my heart jump. Every shift in Boone's breathing made me sit up straight. I kept replaying the scene. The half-open closets, the glowing lamps, the shadow gliding beneath the door. Someone had been inside long enough to make themselves comfortable. Someone who thought the house would be empty. Someone who didn't run until they heard me leaving. The Harpers later told me the police never found a suspect, though a few neighbors recalled seeing unfamiliar vehicles on the forest road earlier that week. Nothing conclusive, nothing useful. But even months later, I catch myself double-checking locks I just closed, looking twice at windows I know I shut tight. The woods don't feel peaceful anymore. They feel watchful. And whenever a house seems too quiet, I remind myself that silence isn't always safety. Sometimes it's warning you to listen harder. Never assume you're alone just because you're supposed to be. Trust your instincts. Protect your safety first, and remember that danger often comes from the places and people you least expect.
I've never been great at saying no, especially when someone asks for help with something that sounds straightforward. So when my coworker, Tessa, mentioned she needed someone to house sit for a weekend at her family's old farmhouse, I agreed before thinking it through. She said the place was quiet, peaceful, and maybe a little too far from civilization, but nothing that would cause trouble. I figured it would be a chance for me to unplug, get away from the office buzz, and maybe catch up on a little sleep. The drive out there was long, weaving through back roads and forested turns that swallowed cell service. By the time I found her driveway, an unmarked gravel path the GPS insisted did not exist. I was already feeling the weight of just how isolated the house really was. Tessa had left the porch lights on timers, the kind that shift between warm and dim every few hours, so you never feel like the house is empty, she had said with a laugh. The farmhouse was charming in the way older homes are: creaky floors, heavy doors, and that faint smell of old pine boards soaking up decades of weather. Storm clouds had been rolling in all afternoon, and as night came, heavy rain settled over the fields like a thick curtain. I spent the first night reading on the couch with the dog, Willow, curled at my feet. Nothing unusual happened, but by the second night, after a draining day of driving back from visiting family, I returned to the farmhouse too tired to think straight. That exhaustion, I would later realize, made everything that followed feel unreal, like drifting into a nightmare I wasn't fully awake for. I fell asleep on the living room couch with the storm hammering the windows. Around 2 a sharp metallic clanking jerked me awake. It was the kind of sound that doesn't blend into rain, a deliberate, steady noise, like someone trying to pry something open. At first, I thought maybe a branch or a loose shutter was being thrown around by the wind, but the sound came in short, rhythmic bursts. Clank, pause, clank, pause. I whispered, "Willow," expecting her to bark, but she wasn't even in the room. That was strange. She'd barely left my side since I arrived. I got up, shuffled toward the window, and nudged the curtain aside just enough to see out into the yard. The shed sat behind the house, a squat little structure with peeling white paint and a sagging roof. And behind it, half hidden by the shadows, stood a man. His back was hunched as he worked at something in front of him. A padlock? A door? I couldn't tell. The only light was a dim flood lamp the owners kept on the far corner of the house, and every time the rain came down harder, the man's shape blurred like a smear on a wet canvas. But what unsettled me most wasn't the fact that he was there. It was what wasn't. No car, no bicycle, no lantern or flashlight. Nothing that suggested he had arrived with any purpose other than simply appearing out of the dark woods. He eventually stepped back from the shed and wandered slowly toward the tree line, disappearing as though the woods had swallowed him whole. I told myself over and over that he was just a lost hiker, someone confused by the storm. But the part of me that stayed awake long after I lay back down knew better. The storm felt worse by the time I drifted into a restless half-sleep again. Maybe an hour passed, it could have been less. Suddenly, a sharp, deliberate tapping hit the big front window. Not the random scatter of rain, not branches. Tap, tap, tap. Slow, purposeful. I sat up immediately, pulse thundering in my ears. I didn't want to look. Every instinct begged me not to, but fear mixed with disbelief pushed me toward the curtains as though I needed proof of what I already knew. I pulled the curtain back an inch. The man stood directly in front of the window, his face inches from the glass. Rain streamed down his cheeks, making his expression warp and ripple. But his eyes, they were fixed on the room like he was checking inventory. No curiosity, no panic at being seen, just blank evaluation. He lifted one hand and tapped the glass again with 2 fingers. Tap, tap. That's when I saw the object in his other hand, long, metallic, catching the low light from the hallway. Maybe a crowbar, maybe something worse. I whispered, "Nope. Not staying for this." Grabbed the house keys and snatched my bag from the floor. Willow bolted after me. Before I could reach the door, the man moved toward it, slowly, testing the handle with a casual twist, like he was checking whether the house happened to be unlocked for him. The knob rattled. My breath vanished. Without thinking, I sprinted to my car, Willow scrambling across the seats as soon as I opened the door. I turned the ignition with shaking hands. As the headlights lit up the porch, the man turned toward me slowly, calmly, still holding that metal object in his hand. No anger, no surprise, just that same empty stare. I didn't let the car fully stop before I sped down the long gravel driveway. Rain splashed across the windshield so hard I could barely see the road, but adrenaline shot through me like a second heartbeat. Every few seconds, I checked the rearview mirror. The man wasn't following. He wasn't running after me. He just watched. His stillness scared me more than if he'd chased us. When I finally got cell service again, I pulled over at a gas station miles down the highway and called Tessa. My voice cracked halfway through explaining, and she cut me off with, "You saw someone out there?" Her reaction wasn't relieved disbelief, it was horror. "Nobody lives near that property," she said. "Nobody hikes that land. Nobody should have been within a mile of the house, especially not in a storm." She urged me to call the sheriff's office, which I did. An officer agreed to meet me back at the house once the weather cleared enough for patrol to reach the area. Going back felt like a bad idea, but I didn't want to leave the place open if the man was still there. When we arrived, the house was silent, the windows dark, the shed untouched. The officer searched the property, the fields, the forest line. No footprints they'd already washed away, no signs of forced entry, nothing missing, no tracks on the long driveway. The officer finally said, "Could be a drifter passing through." Storm brought him close. Hard to say, but his tone made it clear he didn't believe his own explanation. Something about the man's presence, the lack of vehicle, the way he moved didn't fit any ordinary scenario. I didn't stay for the final night. Tessa insisted I go home, and I didn't argue. Even after driving hours away, I kept replaying the image of that man's expressionless face in the window. How calm he'd been, how unhurried. One part of me tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was lost, confused, not dangerous. But every instinct in my body had screamed that this wasn't a man looking for shelter. This was someone checking whether he had an opportunity. A warm, well-lit farmhouse sitting alone in the woods. No neighbors, no witnesses, no reason for anyone to show up except with bad intentions. For days afterward, I found myself checking my doors twice before bed, sometimes 3 times. I kept curtains closed even in places where no one could realistically be watching. The isolation I once found peaceful now felt like a hunt waiting for a target. Tessa later told me her family had the locks changed and installed motion lights. She also admitted quietly that she regretted ever mentioning to her extended circle that the house would be empty that weekend. Whoever he was, she said, he shouldn't have known anyone was out there. I agreed. And that's what frightened me most. Because some people don't need a reason to show up. Some people drift through the darkest places, looking for opportunities no one would hear them take. And out there, far from highways and signals and neighbors, you realize how thin the walls really are. I never planned on spending a stormy week alone in an old house at the edge of town, but I'd agreed to house sit for my cousin Melissa while she visited her parents in Colorado. She'd asked me months earlier, and at the time it felt like an easy favor. Water a few plants, feed the cat, keep an eye on the place. Simple enough. The house itself was built sometime in the late 42nds, all narrow hallways and creaky floorboards that complained with every temperature change. During the day, it had a kind of quiet charm, but at night, especially during storms, the place felt like it remembered every decade it had lived through and insisted on expressing each one in groans and pops. That night, I was sitting at the small desk in the upstairs guest bedroom, working on a deadline for a design project. The storm outside had rolled in without restraint, thunder cracking like splitting wood, rain hammering the windows hard enough that I kept checking to make sure they were actually closed. At first, every noise felt explainable. Houses settle, pipes groan, wind shakes things loose. But around midnight, a sound rose above the storm, something heavy shifting downstairs. It wasn't the casual settling of old wood. It was deliberate, like someone had pressed their weight into the floor. I paused. Fingers hovered over my keyboard, listening. The house went quiet again, too quiet given the storm. But when I leaned back in my chair, a second thump echoed through the stairwell. I felt it more than heard it. My stomach knotted. Probably something fell, I muttered to myself. Saying it out loud felt like a charm against anything worse. Still, I got up and stepped into the hallway, trying to convince myself I wasn't starting to panic. I flicked on the hall light, its yellow glow spilling down the stairs. Nothing moved, nothing shifted, but the silence felt wrong. I stood at the top of the stairs longer than I needed to, telling myself to stop overreacting. When you're alone, every noise feels sharper, like the house is tuning itself to your heartbeat. I forced myself to check the first floor anyway. Step by step, I descended the stairs, each creak under my feet reminding me the house had its own pulse. The living room was exactly as I'd left it, dim, still, untouched. The rain streaked down the windows so thickly that the outside world blurred into a smear of black and silver. I checked the kitchen next. Empty. The back door was locked. Everything was normal. See? I whispered. Wind, old house, nothing else. I made my way upstairs again, feeling ridiculous for letting my nerves get to me. Back in the guest room, I sat down at my desk, ready to finish my work and call it a night. Then came the sound right outside my door. Not a thump, not a creak. Footsteps, slow, heavy, human. My breath caught in my throat. The door was cracked open about 3 inches, just enough that the hallway beyond appeared like a thin slice of shifting shadow. I turned my head toward the opening. A figure, tall, broad, walked past the doorway. I froze so hard I didn't even blink. He moved calmly, like someone who belonged there, and stepped into the guest room across the hall. The door to that room stood slightly ajar, and I watched the shadow slip through it without a sound. My pulse hammered in my ears. Someone was already inside the house. Very slowly, I reached for the bedroom door and shut it quietly. My hands shook as I turned the lock. The moment the lock clicked, the quiet shifted. Footsteps charged toward me fast. The door vibrated as the intruder slammed into it with full force. I stumbled back, nearly falling. He hit the door again, and again. The old hinges groaned with each impact. "Hey!" I shouted, voice cracking. "Get out of here!" He stopped pounding, but didn't leave. Instead, he breathed long, heavy breaths, right on the other side of the door. Then silence, and the sound of him walking downstairs. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped my phone when I dialed 911. Every muscle in my body tensed as I stared at the doorknob, half expecting it to start turning. I whispered to the dispatcher, trying not to make a sound that might draw the man back upstairs. "Someone's in the house," I said, voice trembling. "He was just at my door. He tried to break in. He's still here." The dispatcher kept me calm, kept me talking. told me officers were on their way, but every second felt like an hour. The storm outside raged on, lightning flashing through the edges of the curtains, thunder rolling so violently it shook the windows. For a moment, I thought maybe the intruder had left. It was quiet, eerily quiet, until I heard movement downstairs, soft steps, a faint shuffle, something being dragged lightly across the floor, then total stillness again. I didn't breathe for what felt like minutes. I kept the phone pressed to my ear, listening as the dispatcher repeated, "Stay with me. Officers are almost there." The first hint of relief came when red and blue lights flickered faintly against the storm-soaked window. A patrol car pulled into the driveway, headlights slicing across the living room below. I heard the officers shouting commands from outside. Then, a burst of frantic footsteps, not toward the front door, but deeper into the house. One of the officers yelled again. A door downstairs slammed open, loud, violent, echoing through the walls. Then the unmistakable sound of someone sprinting across wet grass. The officers barreled inside moments later. I unlocked the bedroom door only when they called my name. All of us stood frozen as we heard the intruder tearing through the backyard, crashing into bushes, then disappearing into the dark storm. "He didn't leave earlier," one officer said, shaking his head. "He hid somewhere inside until we got here." That thought chilled me more than anything else had. The officers searched the house room by room while I stayed in the hallway, hugging my arms around myself. My body was still thrumming with adrenaline. Every noise made me jump, a shifting beam, a loose hinge, a drip of water from a window frame. "We're going to check everywhere," the older officer told me. "Intruders like this, they usually pick houses that look empty." He probably thought the place was vacant for the week. I swallowed hard. Melissa had posted about her vacation on social media. It wouldn't have taken much for someone to put it together. The officers checked closets, behind furniture, under beds. The strange part wasn't what they found, it was what they didn't. No bag, no weapon, no sign he'd broken in through a window or door. "You're saying he was probably in here before I came back for the night?" I asked. "Could have been," the younger officer said. "Maybe hours, maybe longer." That thought crawled under my skin like ice. The officers eventually found the most likely entry point, a basement window latch that had rusted loose. It didn't even look like it had been forced, as if it had been waiting for someone bold enough to push it open. When they checked the basement, they found muddy footprints leading behind an old shelf unit. It had just enough space for someone to stand quietly in the dark. He must have heard me come home, heard me moving upstairs, waited for the right moment when he thought the house was empty enough to explore, or worse, waited to see who I was. By the time the officers finished, the intruder was long gone. The storm outside was breaking apart, leaving the night soaked and oddly quiet. "You shouldn't stay here tonight," the older officer said. "You've been through enough." He didn't have to convince me. Melissa came home early the next morning after I called her with the police sitting beside me. She was shaken, apologizing over and over, even though none of it was her fault. The officers stayed until she arrived, walking us through everything again, explaining how break-ins like this were often crimes of opportunity. But what stuck with me most was something one officer said quietly while the others weren't listening. "You locked that bedroom door at exactly the right moment," he told me. "If you hadn't heard him, if you'd stayed focused on your work for another minute or two, we might be having a different conversation." It wasn't meant to scare me, but it did, because deep down, I already knew it was true. For days afterward, I kept replaying the moment I saw the shadow pass the door. The way the intruder moved, calm, steady, almost like he knew the house better than I did. The pounding, the breathing, the silence, and the realization that he hadn't left when he slammed that door. He'd stayed, listening, waiting. I learned later that a string of homes in that area had been targeted by the same man, someone who watched houses for patterns, who waited for owners to leave town, who slipped inside hours before doing anything. He'd never expected anyone to be awake upstairs at midnight, or that I'd locked the door before he could try to open it. Even now, years later, thunderstorms still make me pause. That night taught me that danger isn't always dramatic or obvious. Sometimes it waits in the quiet, behind an open door, in the shadow you almost convince yourself you imagined. And sometimes, the thing you fear most isn't the intruder running through the night, it's what he was doing before you even realized he was there. I'd agreed to house sit for my friend Jenna while she worked a week-long conference in Oregon. She'd just finished renovating her old 2-story farmhouse, new siding, new locks, New layout inside, and she was proud of the place. The location was the kind of quiet that used to feel peaceful to me. Long gravel driveway, a field stretching out behind the house, and only one neighbor about a mile up the road. I thought the week would be easy. Feed her dog, Milo. Keep the lights on. Pretend the creaks and hums of the old bones of the house were normal. The first night passed without issue. Just the usual farmhouse sounds and the wind pushing against the eaves. But on the second night, as I was cleaning up the kitchen after a late dinner, something shifted. A heaviness, the kind of silence that makes you stop and listen without knowing why. At exactly midnight, there came a knock, 3 slow, evenly spaced knocks at the front door. It wasn't loud, but it felt practiced, intentional. Milo lifted his head and whimpered. I walked to the door, my pulse picking up, and looked through the peephole. A man stood on the porch wearing a windbreaker, holding a clipboard. He gave a tight smile. Evening, he said. I'm with the township. We've had some reports of a sewer issue out this way doing emergency inspections. His tone was rehearsed, too smooth. Something in me tightened as I asked, which house made the report? He hesitated long enough that the answer already felt wrong. The stranger cleared his throat, his eyes flicking to the side before he replied, several in this area. My stomach dropped. There times was, times no, area. Not out here. I kept the door partially closed. We don't have sewer issues, I said. You should check with the township office in the morning. He took a half step forward, as if expecting me to open the door wider. These things can't wait. Good night, I said, shutting and locking the door firmly. I hadn't even taken my hand off the deadbolt before the next knock came, this time from the side door. 3 knocks again. Slow, calculated. Milo growled and backed up the stairs. I felt a cold wave roll through my chest. The side door wasn't visible from the front porch. He shouldn't have been able to move that quickly unless he already knew the layout. I didn't go near that door. Instead, I turned off the kitchen light and backed toward the living room. Another knock, this one against a window on the opposite side of the house. My breath caught. He was circling, testing entry points, mapping the place. I grabbed my phone and called Jenna. When she answered, half asleep, I whispered, "Who did you tell about your remodel?" "No one," she whispered back. "And no one knows the new layout. What's going on?" I told her everything. She went dead silent. "Get upstairs," she said urgently. Now, I hurried up the stairs with Milo pressed against my legs, his entire body trembling. The farmhouse seemed to breathe around us, timbers settling, old beams groaning, but my ears filtered out everything except the possibility of footsteps. I reached the upstairs hallway and whispered to Milo, "It's okay, buddy. We're fine. We're fine." I didn't believe it, and neither did he. I called 911 with shaky hands, trying to keep my voice low. The dispatcher told me to stay where I was and keep the bedroom door locked until officers arrived. I ducked into the guest room, locked the door, and sat with my back against it. The house went quiet again, so quiet I could hear Milo's heartbeat against my arm. Then the back door clicked, It wasn't slammed. It wasn't kicked. It sounded like someone easing it open just enough to slip inside. My whole body went numb. "Milo," I whispered. No noise. Soft footsteps moved across the downstairs hardwood. Slow, searching, like someone exploring a home they felt comfortable in. Floorboards creaked under deliberate weight. A drawer opened. Something brushed against the wall. I covered my mouth with both hands. Milo pressed his head into my lap, shaking violently. The footsteps eventually faded toward the back of the house, but they didn't go outside. They were still in here somewhere, waiting, listening. Red and blue lights finally splashed across the bedroom wall. An officer shouted from outside, and Milo let out a soft whine of relief. I stayed frozen another few seconds, afraid the intruder would bolt toward the stairs, but the house remained still. "Police," someone called. "If anyone is inside, make yourself known." I cracked open the bedroom door. "Upstairs," I called shakily. 2 officers ran up to me, ushering me and Milo to the hallway. They moved through the house in a coordinated sweep. First floor, closets, basement, crawl spaces. Every room was checked twice, but the intruder was gone. The back door stood slightly ajar, a faint trail of muddy footprints leading into the yard before disappearing into the field. "He knew we were coming," one officer muttered. "Bolted the second our lights hit the driveway." Another officer knelt by a window. "We've got pry marks here, and here." He checked 2 more. He tried 3 different entry points before he found one that gave. The worst discovery came at the back door. "Prince," the younger officer said quietly. "Inside the lock." He made it partway in before the call was even made. I felt my knees weaken. "So he was already inside?" "Yeah," the officer said grimly. "And from the look of things, he's been posing as an inspector for weeks, picking isolated homes." My skin crawled. "He wasn't checking sewer lines," I said. "No," the officer replied. "He was checking who was alone." Jenna came home early the next morning, still in her conference clothes, hair unbrushed, face pale from worry. She hugged me like she thought I might disappear if she let go. Officers walked us through everything again, assuring us that patrol units would keep an eye on the road for the next few nights. After they left, Jenna and I stood in the quiet kitchen, staring at the back door as if expecting another slow knock. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I shouldn't have asked you to stay here alone." "It's not your fault," I said. "Anybody would have opened the door a little, but he knew the layout," she said. "He knew the remodel. How is that even possible?" We didn't have an answer. Maybe he'd watched the place for days. Maybe he'd slipped inside before the remodel and memorized the structure. Maybe it was simpler and scarier than that. Some people study isolated homes the way hunters study patterns. What stayed with me wasn't the knocks or the footsteps. It was the idea that he had stood on the porch, smiling like a professional, clipboard in hand, while knowing exactly what he intended to do inside. For nights afterward, any small sound made me jump. Even now, I double-check every lock before bed. Trust feels different after someone tries to wear a uniform of authority just to get close. Sometimes danger doesn't break the door down. Sometimes it knocks, slowly, politely, and with a smile. I'd always been a night runner. Something about the world going quiet made it easier for me to think, to breathe, to shake off the noise of the day. So when I agreed to house sit for a family friend, Mrs. Callahan, in her quiet suburban neighborhood, I stuck to my routine. The area felt safe, streetlights on every corner, sprinklers humming at odd hours, the occasional dog barking behind a fence. Nothing ever felt threatening. Her house backed up to a small nature trail that looped around the neighborhood. It was wide enough for bikes, shaded by tall pines, and mostly empty at night except for the occasional late walker. I'd run it dozens of times before, and I never had a reason to feel uneasy. But this particular week, I was stressed, work deadlines, personal stuff, and running helped me clear my head. That night, around midnight, the air was cool, the sky moonless, and I set out with my headphones around my neck, listening to my own footsteps crunching on the gravel. I remember thinking it was unusually quiet. No distant cars, no porch lights clicking on, nothing. I turned onto the nature trail, expecting the usual calm. Instead, I saw him. A man stood completely still on the path ahead, maybe 50 feet away. He wasn't walking a dog, wasn't holding a phone, wasn't doing anything except facing in my direction, his posture rigid, head slightly lowered. At first I thought he might be waiting for someone, but something about how unmoving he was made me slow down. As I jogged past, he didn't step back or greet me. He just slowly turned his head to follow my movement, as if tracking me. And for the first time ever during a night run, I felt truly watched. I sped up without meaning to, pretending I didn't care, pretending I wasn't unnerved, but the sensation of his eyes following me lingered long after I passed him. Probably just some guy, I told myself, maybe waiting for his dog, maybe drunk, maybe weird but harmless, but uneasiness sat under my ribs like a weight. I decided I'd do one more loop and head back early. When I rounded the trail again 5 minutes later, I scanned ahead for the man, partly to reassure myself he was still there, partly hoping he wouldn't be, but he wasn't. The trail was completely empty. There was no sound of footsteps, no rustling of leaves, no retreating figure. Just moonlight scattered through the branches and my own breathing. I slowed to a walk, turning in a slow circle, listening. Nothing, not even the wind. He couldn't have walked past me, I'd have heard gravel crunching. He couldn't have slipped off the trail quietly, thick brush bordered both sides, and he definitely couldn't have run back the way he came without me noticing some movement. Yet he was simply gone. A chill worked its way up my spine. That primal, ancient instinct whispered, "You need to leave." I left the trail and jogged the rest of the way home, glancing behind me far more than I'd like to admit. The houses looked ordinary, calm, porch lights flickering in the distance. When I reached the Callahan house, I stepped inside quickly and locked the front door. Milo, their golden retriever, padded up to greet me, tail wagging lazily. His presence helped, but not enough. Then came a soft scraping sound right outside the door. I froze, and when I looked through the peephole, my breath left me in a single violent jolt. It was him. He wasn't knocking, wasn't talking, wasn't shifting his weight or fidgeting. He just stood on the porch facing the door like he had followed a trail of breadcrumbs straight to me. His face was expressionless, eyes blank but unblinking, as though he'd known exactly which house I would enter. My voice caught in my throat. I stepped back slowly, careful not to make noise, and Milo let out a low whine behind me. The man didn't react to the dog or the sound. He kept glancing left and right, like he was waiting for someone else to show up or like he was deciding whether to move toward a different entry point. I ducked behind the kitchen counter and dialed 911. My voice shook as I whispered to the operator. Someone followed me home. He's standing right outside the door. Is he attempting to break in? She asked. No, but he shouldn't be here. He followed me from the trail. He was watching me. I swallowed hard. Please send someone. She assured me officers were on the way. I could barely hear her over the pounding of my own heartbeat. I peeked through the window that looked onto the porch. The man had tilted his head slightly, like he was listening for movement inside the house. When the distant sound of a patrol car siren echoed down the street, I thought, finally, he'll run. But he didn't. He didn't flinch, didn't turn, didn't react at all. Even as the cruiser pulled right up to the driveway and two officers stepped out, the man stayed rooted, staring blankly at the door as though the world around him didn't exist. Only when one officer got within arm's reach did the man slowly blink, as if coming out of a trance. From the window, I watched the officers talk to him, or rather I watched them try to. The man barely responded. He looked confused, detached, like he wasn't fully present. When they asked for his name, he said he didn't know. When they asked why he was on the porch, he looked at the house, then back at them, and muttered, "I thought, something." His voice trailed off. "Sir, were you following the resident?" one officer asked. The man blinked slowly. "I was walking." I wrapped my arms around myself, still shaking. Milo leaned against my leg, sensing something was wrong. After another minute, one officer knocked on the door. I opened it hesitantly. "You okay?" he asked. "Just scared," I admitted. He followed me from the trail. He was just standing there watching me. The officer nodded sympathetically. "I understand. But here's the problem, he hasn't broken any laws. He didn't trespass beyond the porch, didn't threaten you, didn't attempt entry." I stared at him, disbelief flooding through me. "So, what? He just gets to walk away?" The officer sighed. "We can escort him off the property. We can ask him to move along. But we can't detain him without cause." I watched helplessly as they guided the man down the walkway. He didn't resist, didn't argue. He just walked as though he had no idea why he'd come in the first place. But before he got into the patrol car for a courtesy transport, he turned his head slowly, deliberately, and looked back at the house, looked back at me, not angry, not curious, just remembering. The officers didn't notice, but I did. The house felt different after that. The kind of quiet that doesn't comfort you, it presses against your skin. Every creak sounded like footsteps. Every shadow felt too close. Milo refused to leave my side, even when I showered or tried to sleep. The police returned once more the next day to ask a few follow-up questions. They said the man had no ID, no address to provide, and no record they could find from his initial responses. They let him go after he insisted he wasn't trying to harm anyone. He didn't meet criteria for detainment, they repeated. He wandered off. Wandered off. Those words haunted me. That night, I sat on the couch with every light on in the house, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the wall clock. Normal sounds, familiar sounds, but I couldn't shake the image of him standing perfectly still on the trail, turning his head as I passed like he'd chosen me from the moment he first saw me. When Mrs. Callahan returned 2 days later, I told her everything. She hugged me tightly and apologized for something that wasn't her fault. I left her house grateful to be going back to my apartment, where at least the noises were familiar. But even now, months later, I don't run at night anymore. I don't use that trail. I don't ignore my instincts, because sometimes danger doesn't chase you loudly. Sometimes it follows quietly, patiently waiting for the moment you stop paying attention. And sometimes the scariest people are the ones who never say a single word. Always trust your instincts. Your body notices danger long before your mind rationalizes it. Awareness, boundaries, and caution are not paranoia. They are tools that protect you in moments when silence can hide real threat.